All right, you guys, this is part 2 of the alien interview by Lawrence R. Spencer. Yay! And we're doing chapters 7 and 8, which is like the ancient history, or Errol's, the aliens, like view on the ancient history of Earth, and then the recent history of Earth. And recent for her is like whatever, like 5,000 years ago or something.
Yes.
Or like the Middle Ages. So anyway, but okay, so I'll just read my first note that I have on chapter 7, and then you can and then we can kind of do that. All right, so so she refused to answer any of the other questions from the gallery. The galleries, the other people who wanted it, and then again, they continued to give her the books at night, whatever she wanted, which I still think is weird. But okay, her first major thing she talks about is time. And this I actually wrote some quotes from it. She goes, okay, time, it's an arbitrary measurement of motion of objects through space. Space is not linear. Space is determined by the point of view of the ISB. When viewing an object, distance between the ISB and the object views is called space. Objects or energy masses in space don't necessarily move in a linear fashion. In this universe, objects tend to move randomly or in a curving cylindrical pattern, or determined by an agreed upon rules. And I'm like, agreed upon by who?
The ISBs, I guess, who have created this this physical universe. That was my thought on that too. I also wrote down that quote. I don't know, but maybe it was agreed upon by the council. This is not related, but there are some theories about the whole experiment, like Earth as an experiment culture. And so maybe that was part of the rules of the experiment. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, this is pretty much relativity, right? I mean, it's basically it's relative to where you are, your distance and your location and your, between two object kind of things. And then she also says that history is not linear.
Yes.
It's not recorded, but,
I have that one
but
also.
Interactions that are concurrent and simultaneous. Time can be sensed as a vibration. I thought that was an interesting wording.
That is, because I'm glad that you mentioned that, because even though I listened to that, just hearing it again from that you wrote that down, I didn't write that point down. Something else stood out for me, but that's an excellent point. So it's like a series of vibrations. That's what history is.
Or that's what time is. Yeah, time can be sensed as a vibration. That's what she said.
Okay, yes. Wonder where that deja vu comes in somewhere in that. No idea.
I don't either.
The thing about time. No. This one was about history, because time was the first part of chapter 7, and then history was the second part of that. Yeah. The time relative. What else about time? Does anything else stand out for you?
So they're immortal in that they've been around since before the beginning of the universe, and they're not born and they can't die. And I like that she says before the beginning of the universe. But that always really bothers me, because I'm always just I've spent many a nights in bed from the time I was a little tiny kid until last night, thinking about there can't be an actual beginning. Like a beginning, it can't exist, because it just can't, because to begin, you have to have something to begin, and you can't have nothing from nothing, because nothing is still something.
No, that's an excellent point. I think humans tend to want to think that there is a beginning. Like for me, I can understand that there's a beginning but no end, because that the end, just once something is in motion, it just continues to go and grow and develop and be unending. But for me, I feel like there always has to be a beginning. But I love the fact that you think that there doesn't have to be a beginning, because the reality is it doesn't. There is no beginning.
I want a beginning, but it does not make sense to me. I don't think a beginning, there can be no true beginning, because something had to exist to begin it.
Right.
Which thereby already existed, which thereby already existed, which thereby already existed. Yes. So really the only thing that makes sense to me is infinity, in true infinity. And she actually does say something about how that they can they can like they can create a beginning and it can't have an end, kind of thing.
Yes, right. Once it's created, it can't be uncreated. Like it exists. Matter can just be converted. It can never not exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So she says the physical universe itself is formed from convergence and amalgamations. I don't know if I pronounce that right. Of many other universes, each created by an ISB or a group of ISBs.
Mm-hmm.
They agree that energy can be created but not destroyed, which has an ever-expanding universe, nearly infinite physical proportions. Before physical universe, magic, not solid, and it was wholly illusionary. Okay,
right.
so but that's kind of interesting to me. So it's like that they agreed that energy can be created but not destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, it just was. I don't even know if that was agreed. It was just, that's what it is. Once something is created, it can't be uncreated. It just can change. So constantly, that's why it's constantly expanding, because it's constantly being created by ISBs. So even if you create something, it's either just going to be changed from one form to another, but it's never not going to not exist.
Well, then this is interesting how she talks about, she says our existing collection of suns in this immediate vicinity of the universe have been burning for the last 200 trillion years. The age of universe is nearly infinitely old, but probably at least 4 quadrillion years since the beginning. And it says,
so it does make a reference to the beginning.
Yeah, and it says time's hard to measure as it's based off of a subjective memory of an ISB and no uniform recording measurements.
Oh, yes, I wrote that down too. And my thoughts about that was, if there were no uniform recording mechanism, then I felt like, well, what about the Akashic records? Because we have if you believe in the Akashic records, it's like there's this recording of anything that's ever existed.
Well, I mean, I think by recording, it means like a year isn't this, like, okay, a year is an arbitrary time frame that we've taken from like the rotation of the sun around the earth around the sun. Well, if you're not on earth, a year has no meaning. Like, so like if you have these infinite beings and these infinite places and everything, then it's all going to be it's subjective. It's all going to be based on where they are and how like their solar cycles work, or if they have solar cycles at all, or whatever. So yeah, like there's no standard uniform like throughout all time measurement of time.
That's right. And also it goes back to her referencing the physical universe. So we live in a physical universe, but there are other universes. Like she was talking about, I wrote down how she was talking about how she like exists in these other universes. So it made me think that she's like the particle in the wave, that, okay, we're in this time space reality here. And this is, even if you're conscious, like you could say that I'm at this location, but and you can think of that as a point, but in reality we're also a wave. And so maybe that's the non-physical universe that goes on into this other universe. I don't know, that was because everything was referenced back to like this physical universe, but there again are these other universes that aren't physical.
Yeah, I mean, I liked how she said they're magic and illusionary, like, which is
the illusionary ones, like the magicians can create them and then they make them disappear type of thing, like magic.
And she said we still have memory from that, like as if that's what our unicorn and dragon fairy stuff is like.
Right, mythology, or who knows. Yeah,
it's like I guess maybe like a memory glimpse into that dimension that is or was, I don't know. But I do sort of feel like well, what are dreams? You know, that's a different, like, we exist in our dreams in some astral plane.
Yes.
I have a more full and active dream life than I do a waking life. Like I've lived much longer in my dream life than I have here. Like I've done way more things, and you know, and I feel way older when I'm there than I do when I'm here.
Yeah, right. So how do we know that that's, who's to say that's not real, because it is real? And where does that exist in your dream? Like, where does that exist besides in your dream?
I mean, like, for everything I've looked at, conventional science, medicine, whatever of today, like they look at dreams as just like brain processing of junk. It's just like trying to
well, that's part of it. Yeah.
Process your day or something, and it's like your processor in your computer, like filing or something.
Right. Well, the Aborigines had a big dream culture, so I mean that's just a Western or a specific perspective.
I mean,
of
I personally think that's just like, I don't know, like, don't you have a bunch of crazy friends? I have a lot of friends who don't dream, like don't have dreams. It bothers me a lot. I'm like, whoa, that's.
Yeah, I don't recall anybody not having dreams, but yeah, there's some people that say they don't have dreams. Yeah.
I know at least four people who say they've never had a dream.
Yeah, that's weird. How could you have never had a dream?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that. More recently, I used to always remember my dreams, but now I don't as much. I do remember them, but I don't write them down, or I remember them as soon as I wake up and then forget them. But like, I can imagine forgetting a dream or not remembering, but not
to like not never even really know that you've ever had one. Yeah. I don't know. That makes me wonder if they got really zapped. Oops, I don't know, but they got super zapped, from.
Maybe they got zapped. Right. Yeah, they're that whole zapping.
One more thing she says is that before we talk about the grid thing, or like the electrical thing that's holding us, is that each spirit is not the same. Each is completely unique in identity, power, awareness, and ability.
Yeah.
So the difference in an Isby like Errol and us is that she can enter in and out of her doll, like whatever, as she pleases, and is not of the physical universe entirely. Yes. So she has no location in space and time.
Yes, that was my point, where I think she's like a wave.
Right. Which is, I liked that, actually. Why can't we be that again?
And I think we are that, but we're just also in this physical world in bodies.
And in prison. We're in a prison planet.
According to that.
And then it says telepathy can experience sensations more intensely than the physical body, or that her Isbies, they have telepathy, but they can also experience sensations more intensely than the physical body without having physical sensory mechanisms.
Yes.
So she can exclude pain from her perception even if she wanted to.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy to think that, because we're so used to thinking how our sensory perception is how we experience sensation. So to not have that would be hard for us to understand how to have that experience.
But going back to dreams, it's like, I kind of get it, because I've been like, my emotions in my dream state have always been like way more high. Like, I've had way better sex in my dreams than I have in real life. I've had way scarier things.
Yeah.
Like I've had things that have upset me way more than they have in real life. And I've been like just like flying and elated. Like my emotional range, I feel like in my dreams is like an overload versus here. So I kind of get that, if there's any correlation or correlation.
It's something that's beyond our physical experience. It's just another experience. I was thinking, like, how, if you think of how plants experience pain, there was an experiment where that plants were hooked up to the lie detector, and before the person who was doing the experiment was hooking up the plant to the lie detector to see if how they would experience, like, if they did something to the plant. Right. So then the thought was, oh, I can burn the plant. And as soon as he had that thought, the lie detector started going off the charts, and the plant had a response. So it was like, we don't know what that plant felt. His thought influenced that plant. And so.
Yeah, but that also means the plants are telepathic.
But it also, that's true, but it also means that they experience something that it experienced a thought as like some kind of sensation. So for us, that was like probably pain, and that it was like, and so and had already experienced that, even if it didn't actually experience the pain. Like when we anticipate things, when we anticipate something's going to happen, it's like sometimes I've lived out my worst life in my head or my best life, but oftentimes my worst life in my head without actually having experienced it. I'm like, thank God I lived it in my head so I don't have to experience it in the real world. It was so much more real, actually, because it's like, oh, this could have happened, and woe is this, you know? Pretty crazy.
Okay.
I want before we get into the whole prison planet thing and that, like, the zapping, I wanted to just to share a quote about history again. So Errol says that history is a subjective observation of the movement of objects through space, recorded from the point of view of the survivor rather than those who succumbed. Which makes me think, right? I mean, that's true, right? We all know that, like the history books are written by the people
winners,
who are by the winners, right? So it made me think that the domain, was like Earth is being acquired by the domain or for the domain, and Errol is from the domain, right? So like everything that we're hearing is Errol's perspective. So whenever Errol mentions like the old empire, like again, we're understanding that Errol's like going to be for the team that's for the domain, you know?
Right. She's very biased.
Very biased towards the domain. So we don't really know. It sounds like from her perspective, like from what I interpret, it's like the old empire is like terrible, 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 terrible things. And there's probably a lot of that. I don't doubt it. We've all seen what happens with the Dark Ages. She talks about the Dark Ages. And it's like we've seen it, but like at the same time, was it all terrible bad? Like what else was there? It's never all of one or all of the other, you know?
And so to preface that, yeah, like apparently we were seeded by this old empire that she calls it, the old empire. And when they came through the galaxy to, you know, the highway system, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, to go to wherever they were going, they're conquerors, right? So they had battles with the old domain, or the old empire. And they won, but not like Earth was not 100% won, because they still don't know who. There's an electric grid system around the Earth that is so powerful that they say other people who aren't even from the old empire come and dump their criminals here. It's like, It's kind of like a universal prison. And they don't know who made it, and they don't know how to get rid of it.
Well, that was in 1947. So my thought is from that time until now, things have changed, because we've also gone through the harmonic convergence. There's other things that have happened in the last, I don't know, 70 years.
Well, but even she says that, like in chapter 8, she talks about how 1150 AD, the old empire was destroyed. So a small bit of the hypnosis operation diminished. So like that's the electrical grid diminished. So people like Isaac Newton and the like could remember old technologies, and so the Dark Ages started to lift. So like she's saying that that's how long ago the domain beat the old empire, was like at the beginning of the Dark Ages, okay, in 1150 AD. So like we're getting traces of things like that are being let through the grid since then. But so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that that's happening at a faster rate now, because so many people are getting more connected to all of this information and just wanting to remember. You know, we have this whole amnesia thing going on, but I mean, you and I have talked about it, where it's like, I don't want to forget anymore. I want to remember. I'm tired of not knowing like where I came from. I'm tired of not remembering in between these lives.
And it's interesting because it's like I remember enough to know I forgot something.
Right, exactly. So we never, that at the end, it kind of gives this whole, like, we'll get into that later on, but it was like, okay, there's some light in at the end of the tunnel. Maybe you don't want to go towards the light because of the
that's another thing.
But the light being that we never cannot, like, there's always going to be remembering, no matter what. Even if for millions of years you have forgotten, you're eventually going to remember. Like, there's still, if it never doesn't exist, then you're going to remember, or you can remember. You have the opportunity to remember. It's not like that was it.
Right. You know? Like, is it like this prison system that is Earth was meant to be forever, but forever doesn't really exist.
Right, exactly. Forever doesn't really exist, but at the same time, that's the only thing that does exist. So
just like the beginning doesn't ever really exist.
Right. It's just, it goes around and around. It's, the thing I like about it is obviously it gives you a lot to think about, but on the other hand, it's like, it's too much. I could get inside of my head. And like, once I got into this whole prison planet thing, I started getting like, you know, creeped out, feeling sad. Like I was like, I'm not going to sit around and like, let these like, let this serious feeling stick with me, because this is too much. It's too intense. We don't really know. And it's just like, I don't know, for me, it was like, it got pretty heavy at times. And I'm like, I'm not gonna get stuck in the heaviness, I guess.
So she said when the each of us, our Isbies, entered into this physical world is difficult to say, because one, she says all of our memories are always erased every time we're incarnated, and two, that we all came at different times. So between 60 to 3 trillion years ago, and some were captured as slaves and forced to inhabit these bodies to perform medial working tasks like mining, which is another thing with the mining, with the gold thing. And then and others were forced to live here. So we're a group of basically like actual bad criminals, like who are like super perverted, heinous, like demonic type energies they just threw in here. And then they also threw in here, according to her, like anybody who was artistic or creative or not compliant. Like they didn't want to comply with they were just harder to control. Eventually, once this old empire, according to her, who's against this old empire, once this old empire got advanced enough, it didn't need those kinds of creative people anymore, and they were more a hindrance than they were a help. So she said we're an interesting population, and that the reason there's so many different races and other kinds of varieties of people on the planet too is because we're not just like one collective that's throwing all their non-compliant people in here. We're everybody in the universe is throwing all their stuff in here. She said so it's actually unusual to have this many variety of
which is why I think it's an experiment, really. Because it's like we're all these different Isbies from all these different places, these origins, and we're put here together. And it's like, oh, eventually we're going to remember that we're just like immortal beings, really, when it comes down to it. That's part of the remembering. I think it's just remembering like that we are immortal beings, and what are we, you know, all right, where did we come from? We're all one, but at the same time, we're all individuals. It's like, I don't know. It's all good stuff.
She also talks about how so basically this is how they found out that it was a prison planet. Apparently, or I don't, this part I was kind of confused by it, but she basically talks about how there was like one of their domain officers was implanted into the Archduke Ferdinand, like 1914 AD, and he
was attacked and killed
when he was shot. What started World War II. It escaped the body, and when he went up, like they physically saw where the electrical grid was, and he was captured. He wasn't able to come back to them. And so like then that was in 1914, and then that's you know what started World War II and stuff, and that's when they really started like doing investigation into what all of this is going on. So I thought that was weird. But the other thing that I thought was weird about that was because she talks about how the domain entered the Milky Way galaxy 10,000 years ago. They wanted to conquer the old empire that was living in the Big Dipper. Okay, so 8,200 years ago, they set up a base on a mountain at the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it had 3,000 members there, and it was like basically a hologram. They like took the mountaintop off, they had a base, and then they put a hologram up to where it looked like a mountain from other people, but people couldn't go up there, and then ships would go in and out of that unseen. Well, Martians, like from the old empire had people who were living on Mars. The Martians attacked and they captured all the Isbies, and they were all given amnesia, basically sent into Earth bodies, and are still part of like the karmic cycle. And they're still humans today.
Right. And they still, they've gone like from like the Far East pretty much through, like they've little by little reincarnated each time into different parts, like through Iraq, through then the Roman Empire, through into like beyond. So it was like they made this whole, like these 3,000 people or souls or Isbis were constantly reincarnating and making their progress around the world. So now they're all like scattered around the world pretty much. And those are from the domain. Yeah.
And she seems pretty, like Errol seems pretty committed to getting these 3,000 people back.
Yes. Right. That's part of her mission.
Right.
Yeah. And to free the rest of us too. She did mention that also. It was like to get those 3,000 people and others, like everybody except for pretty much like the perverts.
Right.
Get all the artists and the intellectuals.
All the artists and those creative people. She says, returning to the light makes you go through your life sentence again. So yes. Like when you die, whenever you see the light, when you die, she said that's the grid that they've set up around here. That makes
right. And also music or shiny things, anything that's beautiful that will attract an Isby to want to come back. So I was like, all right, that part, I don't know. I guess, you know what? I guess when I was trying to figure out what it was that it made me feel, and I guess it was uncomfortable because it was like, you hear all these things about like, go into the light after you die, go into the light. You want to go into like the goodness and stuff. And then you're like, wait, what? I'm not supposed to do that after?
I know. And then you're kind of like, but then you hear like people who don't go into the light become like ghosts who are sad and like, right. I don't know.
It's too complex. Who knows?
But that is like the thing that is ultimately that's the most important thing about this book.
Well, for me, I feel like I don't want to get stuck on it either way, because even though it was
you can't know whether or not that,
because you don't know. And then what are you supposed to do? For me, I feel like all I want to do is remember. That's all I really want to do is remember. I remember saying that when I told you the story, I went to Catholic school. I had like sitting there in the second grade, learning about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit and how they're 3 in 1. And it's this miracle. And I was like, I want to understand what that means. After I die, I need to know what that means. What does that mean exactly? I want to remember what that means. So I remember asking God in my like second grade self, like, God, can you remind me that this is something that I want to ask you when I die? So I had like, and my entire life, I've always had a list of things like, when I die, I want to know the answer to this for real, because I don't know. And so I feel like now
I like that you're like, you need to remind me
because I can't,
because I don't know if I'll always.
I'm not taking notes here, but you need to take notes on what I went through.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like now, actually, even though I haven't died, I still have, now all these questions are coming back and I'm trying to find the answers so that I do remember when I do pass. And it's like, okay, you know, what's going to happen? And then there's that great amnesia system in between lives. And then I'm like, you know what, whatever it is. What am I supposed to do? They say the more that you fight it, the more that you forget.
What and like for part of me is like, what a if there was any truth in any of this, what a cruel thing to do.
Right. Well, that's what Errol says that about, like the cruelty of it, and she mentions that. That's why it sounds like the domain is essentially good. She was like, we're like the galactic conquistadors, like of the galaxies, but good, because we didn't like the way that the actual like colonizers worked their way, you know, and destroyed like the native people of the world. So anyway, she made that correlation.
Did you ever because I went through some anger where I was like, man, if I get out of this and I'm going to turn into a genie and I'm going to like recapture all the people who captured me, or like whatever, you know, like if you're infinite power or whatever, if you are a god yourself. But then part of me goes like, okay, calm down. Like, here's the thing. Like, did you ever see Peter Pan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You know how like the Lost Boys will like capture the Indians and then they're like, oh, and then then they would let them go. And Wendy was like, wait, what's going on here? And they're like, oh yeah, they capture us, then we let them go, we capture them, we let them go. It's just like a game. It's just like a fun little, like, what else are they gonna do? They're in this never land that's also infinite, that they, you know, they're just playing, they're having fun. Right. And even like the Captain Hook thing, they didn't kill each other, it was just like a game, basically,
like a power struggle in a game,
like a power struggle. And then I kind of think of it almost like that, like it's almost like, okay, if we're immortal and infinite or whatever, and like right now we're stuck in this little memory loop of like not knowing anything and forgetting everything, that won't last forever. Nothing lasts forever.
Right.
So eventually it'll be like, yeah, remember that time when we were like prisoners on Earth? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
cool.
exactly. It all makes our experience. And if there's really no time, then we're already somewhere else experiencing something else in another consciousness anyway. So it doesn't like, so
That hurts my head.
Yeah. It hurts my head too. Exactly. It's so much bigger than I can really imagine. And that's what it comes down to.
Before we move to chapter 8, because I'm almost on chapter 8 now, but like Errol also says that earth scientists don't have an accurate measuring system to gauge the age of matter. Like we measure things into the deterioration, which
right, and they don't deteriorate at the same time.
Because matter never actually alters, but is and it's never actually fully destroyed. So she said carbon-14 dating is flawed, and that the Earth shifts and completely changes surfaces, but it's still the same sand molecules that are the same like forever, like they just reform into something different.
Right. And also, the carbon dating was interesting. Like you can't, it's flawed that you can't date like a tree to, like to some stone. Architecture that's made out of stone, right? Stone. So those like, we're wrong about our system of measurement.
Which I agree. Yeah. I mean, because like, I remember when I was in geology, I was a geology major for a while. It was like, you could take a baby seal that just died like yesterday on the beach, and its carbon-14 reading would be anywhere between yesterday and 200,000 years ago. You're like, okay, well then that is not accurate at all.
You're like, I can see it died yesterday.
Yeah.
I know it did. Yeah.
Well, that's carbon dies in really
but the carbon dating,
lives.
Right. It just
okay.
Wait, there was something else from that chapter that I wanted to mention. It was just a thought that I had. The other thing is like her perspective, I feel like doesn't account for the indigenous population of the world, of the earth, that actually have a different idea than Western thinking. So she read all these Western books, right? And she learned English language. And so even though she mentioned that there are all these different cultures, if you look at native cultures or indigenous cultures that have a very deep connection to spirit world, to extraterrestrial lives, like to their creation myths or stories, then they have a completely different view. So I feel like she negates all of that or just overlooks it like it doesn't exist. So again, she was like, everything that she was comparing with history on this planet was going to like Western history.
Well, true. But she does mention, she says that she says these Isbies mixed with earlier, and so she talks about how says that but this prison plan was designed to keep us forever. Anyway, the Isbies dumped from the old empire were like Sirius, Albatron, the Pleiades, Orion, Draconis, etc. These Isbies mixed with earlier inhabitants of the earth 400,000 years ago to establish Lumeria and Atlantis, which vanished in a tidal wave of the polar shift, and many thousands of years before the current prisoner population started to arrive. So she does say that.
Right.
So I mean, I guess like, and apparently these Isbies are the source of the Oriental races, and that they originated in Australia.
Yes, yeah, she did mention that. That's true. And the other thing that I thought was interesting that she didn't mention, this is in chapter 8, so I guess we can get into chapter 8, but when she talks about like the philosophers and how like there started to be a change in thinking because then these philosophers came and were compassionate, like Lao Tzu, but she didn't mention Jesus, which I thought was really strange, considering if she was looking at it again from this Western perspective, speaking with a woman who gave her a Bible, like she didn't mention Jesus, who's like the pinnacle for so many Christians, like of what compassion and unconditional love is about. And
I found that interesting because I thought she was like, so the dates don't match up for Jesus, but this is who I thought she was talking about. But she says, so between 1500 BCE before Christ and 1200 BCE before Christ, there was a religious battle where the domain tried to infiltrate the old empire, and it tried to teach several individuals about the concept of immortal spiritual beings and how you're all basically these immortal spiritual beings, but that it got
Yes.
corrupted, and like the
Yes.
domain, like, or not, the old empire used methods of corrupting it and used it against the men only so that to make
hypnotism.
only one is be. And I was thinking, well, that kind of sounds a little bit like how people corrupted the message of Christ, where it's like, like, you know, like, oh, he is the God of everything.
Well, I guess, but at the same time, like, if I'm not a big like Jesus like follower, but I mean, again, I was Catholic, but like Jesus was like, oh, everyone can do this, right? So a lot of his teachings were lost. We don't have any of the actual written, or
like
just not given to the public.
He says that, but the church
he says that
that's true. Manipulates it.
The church corrupted it.
The only way to get through heaven is through him.
Right, through a whole bunch of priests.
Yeah,
right.
And me, pay me a tithe.
Right. And there was like, and that whole like unified only one God thing. Yeah.
And she says that Moses grew up in the household of Pharaoh. Ogmotep and with his son Akhenaten, and Nefertiti was his mom, and Tutankhamun was his brother. And that, I looked up a bunch of stuff about that, and those dates don't match. And like online, they say that his adopted mother was Asia, and they never mention a king. They don't never mention which pharaoh it is, but a lot of scholars believe it would have probably the time would have gone in with Ramses II, most likely. Who knows? I don't know.
No, that's interesting. That has to be mentioned, because there's like inaccuracies of dates, and maybe the whole date thing doesn't matter, but it does, because it's not that long ago.
Although Amenhotep or whatever that she claimed in the book, like he's like an androgynous looking being. Like even when I was in the Cairo Museum, a lot of his sculptures show him like with like boobs and like a woman's body, but you know, he's got his beard and his other head on. And then Nefertiti is like you know, have like the big elongated skulls, like it's where they're wearing the like that the weird cap thing or whatever. So that's it, they are kind of alienish, which would be an interesting. She also does say that the domain force brought in the Vedic hymns 8,200 years ago, and that Vishnu, who was like one of the Hindu gods,
was the incarnation
officer, and that he fought against the old empire like really well, like, you know,
and then he was reassigned,
and then when he currently works in the domain with her, and he's somewhere else.
He was reassigned. I thought that was interesting. And he mentioned, among other things, he's aggressive. So I thought he was really aggressive. So I thought, well, aggressive against the old empire, but regardless, it's not all like, you know, shiny and like golden light, happy love on the other side, or whatever that means. I guess maybe that's just our interpretation of what that is. I don't know. Seems a little like there's missing data.
Yeah. And then she also says that, like, in theory, if this amnesia mechanism was destroyed, all of us would regain all of our memories. So she does mention that, which is nice. That's great. But she says that a lot of, like, I don't know what this electronic space opera. She talks about space opera.
Oh, right. Yeah, I had some terms. A space opera. I was like, was that space opera like Star Wars or like operative? I'm not really sure.
But she says the old empire was like the World War II groups that basically have Stockholm syndrome, and like likeness fosters likeness and cruelty begets cruelty. So she says like the reason like you know, some of like the World War II, like not just the Nazis, but even like the Americans dropped the atomic bomb in. But like, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like we are mimicking that which was done to us,
right? Like it's perpetuating
itself. And then she said another like system to kind of keep us in this memory hole is false civilizations that are designed and installed to be completely unlike the old empire, so that you know. But then I was confused by that, because then she also talks about how these Sun type 12 class 7, which I hate when people do stuff like that, like that means anything to us, which is basically like an habitable planet, which she says like places like India, Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, European Empire, medieval Europe were all on existing standard patterns of other planets that existed that were carbon-based life forms, which only a small percentage of planets are that breathable atmosphere.
Right.
So I kind of was like, oh, that's a little interesting.
Yeah, no, it's all definitely interesting stuff. I mean, there's plenty to think about. But I guess the whole remembering thing, yes, is a key point, or like forgetting thing. But I kept like hearing in my head, we're not free until everyone's free. Like no one's free till everyone's free. So it's all like, as a collective, maybe we have to all remember at least a certain part of ourselves, which is where I think we're at actually in late 2019 as a collective. Like we're all starting to realize something else is going on. So even though they said that there's no, until this mechanism was destroyed, this technology, this machine forgetting technology thing was destroyed, like no one would remember. But again, that was in 1947. So like here we are, 2019, and I think that there's another method, because she also mentioned that there's another method, or there could be other methods that we starting to remember. So for me, that what came to me was like, we're all starting to remember. We're actually collectively all starting to remember. And so there's going to come a point, like a breaking point, where we're actually not going to forget anymore. And then she mentions 5,000, the year 5,000, that is when the domain is going to, like, pretty much the machine will have been destroyed. But up until that point, there are still other people from all over the planet, or other ISBs dropping their people here, and the forgetting still is taking place. But in 5,000, that is when that's not going to happen anymore. So
like
there is an
3,000 years from now.
That's actually not that far off. I mean, Danielle Conti won't be around, but my existence will be.
Yeah, never know.
Right. I'll reincarnate the same person. As the same person, 2,000 years.
You never know. We might figure out like how to keep our cells regenerating. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But then that makes me think like, okay, if there's a physical grid structure on the planet, is that the pyramids? Is that what? Like, or like what keeps this thing physically able to hold people in? Like how is this prison like literally made? Especially when later she talks about how it's a super undesirable planet to be on because it does shift all the time.
Yeah.
And I actually, for whenever this book is written, like early 2000s or whatever, that's kind of interesting that she talks about, because the polar shift thing like kind of took up more steam in the last like 3 or 4 years, like not before that. So that was kind of interesting. And I also just find it interesting that why is it that these same collective groups like Orion and Sirius and Pleiades and stuff, like why do these always come up in everything?
Well, probably because they're the closest to us. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I don't know. That's where maybe the most advanced civilizations are. Don't know. It's all question. I think that the system will, I don't know, maybe I'm an optimist or maybe not, maybe I'm just naive. I feel like if there's this whole forgetting thing, and that needs to be destroyed, I actually think that it's our will to just be like, no, I'm not going to forget. Like it's our right.
Like we're agreeing to live in that.
We're agreeing to live in that. So like we're victims, but we're also not victims. We're also, I mean, to be empowered is like to take back who we are as infinite beings, immortal beings, right? So to be an ISBE, to be a creator, is to be like, oh, I'm going to remember. Oh, that's my choice, and I'm choosing to remember. So you can, it's like taking away the Wizard of Oz, and being like, oh, that's the Wizard of Oz behind that curtain. Okay, yeah, whatever. And then just being like, I choose to do what I choose because I'm an ISBE and that's what I choose. So I do think there's an element to that but I mean, it's easier said than done, because you're still, even if the old empire, according to ISBE, like, according to Errol, doesn't exist, like, even if it was destroyed and there's still, like, even if there's no remnants, like, there's still remnants because it's in our collective consciousness, and all of these hypnotic patterns that we just believe have been ingrained. So all of these synapses in our brains actually remember all these old patterns. So they do exist. So we're just kind of like repeating the cycle. So even if they're not here with this actual thing, like we're just we're just repeating it. So until we choose
well, I mean, she basically says that they've been gone for like 1,000 years, and we're just when we die, we're still going through this light that brings us back into these incarnations.
But that's because I think that we are just so used to that pattern. Like if we choose not to do that pattern anymore and we choose to break that pattern, then we can just get beyond it. If I am like, oh no, you know what? I want to hook up with the other galactic beings and I want to go back and, you know, check out life on another planet. And like, that's what I really want to do. Why can't I do that?
Or I told you about this dream a while ago, but it's interesting that it kind of like, I think it kind of relates to this, and that I had a dream that, and it was like a really crazy lucid dream where I felt like I was totally awake. And I had this dream that like my mom like came into my room and was like, there's a tornado, you need to come in my room. And I was like, okay. And like, I felt like it was real. Right. So like, I got up and I was like walking and I was following her, and all of a sudden my feet kind of got heavy and I was like, oh, Mom. And she was like, what? And I was like, this is a dream. And then all of a sudden everything like just went black, and it went blacker than the blackest black of any black I've ever seen. And there was no light anywhere. And all I could do is I could hear my breathing, and I was like, I was panicking, and I was like, oh my God, like, what is this? And like my thought voice in my head was just like, shh, just sit with it. And I was like, I can't, like, I need you know, I've never not seen light like that before. Like even when you close your eyes, you could see like little somethings.
Yeah. It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. And then, and it was just like, this is the film, or this is what's between dimensions. You need to learn to be careful, or you need to learn to be comfortable with this, because it doesn't last forever. But this is what you have to go through to go to another dimension. And then, and I was like, okay. And then, and
wow.
I was okay with it. And then I woke up.
Well, that would be pretty consistent of don't go towards the light, you know, like go just sit with the darkness.
But and that's why I was bringing it up, because it was like I was panicking for light. Like I was like, yes. I was like going any direction I could, but there was no direction to see. I needed to see the light. I was like, you know.
Oh my gosh, no, that's huge. That's profound. That's great. That kind of reminds me of like the I don't really like temazcales, which are like sweat lodges. I've done them a few times. I've had weird experiences. But one of the things that always gets me like panicky is the darkness. And of course the feel of it, because all of a sudden I'm in this thing. But now I feel like I need to go do it again just because of what you mentioned. Like just to start training myself to be comfortable with it and like disciplining myself. Cool. That's great. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, I just felt like it was like kind of related to that feeling of panicking for, you know, for like our basically that habit. Yes. That habit of really wanting to be inside this light thing. Yeah.
Right. No,
but even the darkness doesn't last forever.
No, exactly. It doesn't. Cool. It's good that's a good note to end on there. Is there anything else that like stood out from you big from either chapter 8 or whatever?
No, like those are like, that's probably pretty much, I think I read most of my notes. What about you?
Well, I mean, the amazing last quote was right at the end of that chapter, which says, if the domain sent ships to every corner of the universe in search of hell, the quest could end on Earth. What greater brutality can be inflicted on anyone than to erase the spiritual awareness, identity, ability, and memory that is the essence of oneself? And it's not that I want to end like in a positive, in a negative way like that, because I think we can turn around and put it positive. It's just like, okay, well then it's our responsibility to remember. It's our responsibility to connect with others and to like whatever, to start figuring it out step it up a notch and figuring it out, I guess, without being consumed of it too, because it's like sometimes you get so into it and you're like, whoa, mind blown, but it's too much too, like enjoying it, but you know, I guess raising our consciousness.
I mean, if there's any validity to any of this, like I agree with her. Like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like that's pretty bad, man. I can't think that's like, you did it pretty good, man. That's right. That's pretty low. That's as low as I could think of to go.
Yeah. Well, the different dimensions is like the fifth dimension, supposedly, from what I've listened to about like people that people that channel and whatever, like the fifth dimension is one of the lowest dimensions where beings can come to that are not physical beings, that they can like lower their vibration to come to help raise our vibration up. So it's like the third dimension, which is what we've lived on probably all in the dark ages and under the old empire or whatever, like that is like what there was. But now we're going to the fourth and fifth dimensions, which are bringing our lightness up, and they've come down to help us go up. So I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting because it's like, I do feel like this is unusually heavy, like being incarnated at just, I feel like is a very heavy thing. And it's like, why do I feel that? Like, where do I have that as a reference point from? Like, you know?
Yes, like, right. Good
so
point.
I'm always kind of
You've always had your body. Yeah.
I'm always like, yeah, like this is all I, remember. So supposedly, so like, why would I think this was heavier? Like if I have nothing to compare it to, but unless I just compare it to my dream state or whatever. But no, I always I always do think like sometimes like just putting my arm through the air, I'm kind of like, man, it is like, this is definitely a dense reality.
Yeah.
I really feel like it is. I don't know if there's denser, I don't know, but
oh, well maybe, but I would guess so. There are other denser planets. Oh, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Back in chapter 6, this was great. I was like, oh, you know how there are people who believe that the moon is a satellite and was put there with the satellite. Well, she says, it's not directly stated, but what she did say was the domain is interested primarily in low gravity satellites in this solar system, which consists mainly of the side of the moon facing away from Earth. So I was like, what do you mean? Because she says that they're primarily interested in low gravity satellites, and then compares it to the dark side of the moon. So I was like, well, that's pretty consistent with people who think that the moon is a satellite.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a satellite, but
well, that's true. But like a put in place satellite, like a hollow satellite. Yeah.
I don't trust the moon. That's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole other
podcast.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, it was low gravity. What made me think of that was the whole gravity thing and how it's so dense here, but then like, oh, they're choosing, the domain is looking for low gravity places within this region.
Yeah, well, then don't chill on Earth because it's not.
It's pretty heavy here.
Pretty heavy,
yeah. Do a lot of exercise those muscles.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so next week we'll do more of the book, and like let us know what you think, if we're being completely inconsistent or whatever. I don't know, whatever. Just comment below if you want.
Yeah, leave your thoughts. What do you think about these chapters? Anything stand out?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.